This is NCCE's 2022 Annual Constitution Week Lecture and Panel Discussion. We are live on Facebook, NCCE GH. So those who are not privileged to be here, you can join us live. At this juncture, I would like all of us to stand and we will sing the National Anthem respectfully. Can we be on our feet? I'll give the tune and we'll go. God bless our homeland, Ghana. Can we go? God bless our homeland, Ghana, and make our nation great and strong, bold to defend forever the cause of freedom and of rights. Fill our hearts with true humility, make us cherish fearless honesty, and help us to resist oppressors' rule with all our will and might forevermore. And help us to resist oppressors' rule with all our will and might forevermore. Thank you. Please be seated. Indeed, we are all celebrating 30 years of adopting the Constitution of Ghana. I would like to introduce our guests who are here. The special guest will be done by our moderator, Mr. Samson Ladi Anyenini. Okay. So we have our first Deputy Speaker of Parliament here with us. Mr. Joseph Osei Wusu is here with us. We have our guests from Malawi. They are on a study tour to understudy the work of civic education in Ghana. Our guests from Malawi, can you give us a wave? We have representatives from the National Labour Commission. Can you give us a wave? Yes. Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources are here with us. Ministry of Interior, there's a representative here. Ghana National Fire Service, you are here. West Africa Network for Peace Building, WANEP is here. Economic and Organized Crime Office, IOCO. We have Réseau Afrique, the Ghana Police Service, the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, our hosts. We have the Controller and Accountant General's Department representative here, Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. We have Ashaman Senior High School with us, Public Services Workers Union, CDD Ghana, Department of Political Science, University of Ghana, Legon, Environmental Protection Agency, Ghana Education Service, Ghana Health Service, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, National Identification Authority. We have NADMO, CPP, Judicial Service of Ghana, Veterans Association of Ghana, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ghana Armed Forces, Ghana Lebanon Islamic Senior High School, GLEAS, they are here with us. The Electoral Commission is here. All of you, we have Ni Krotia, who is a Civic Education Club patron of Gamashi. Ni Wambabu Omanye. Thank you all. Please relax and enjoy. We'll move on, and I would like to invite the acting chairperson of NCCE, Ms. Kathy Ade, to give us the welcome remarks. Let's give it up for her.
His Lordship, Justice Gabriel Pwaman, Justice of the Supreme Court, distinguished traditional leaders, ministers of state, members of parliament, distinguished guest speakers, heads of institutions, representatives of civil and other society organizations, press, women and men, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you most cordially to the main lecture of this year's NCCE Annual Constitution Week celebration. The Constitution Week celebration is one of the flagship programs of the National Commission for Civic Education, NCCE. The celebration was instituted in 2001 to commemorate the country's return to constitutional democratic rule. Significantly, April 28, 1992 was the day the Ghanaian electorate voted favorably in a referendum that adopted the draft Fourth Republican Constitution, which subsequently came into force on 7th January 1993. In the year 2000, NCCE held our first annual Constitution Week, a week of intensive public engagement on the 1992 Constitution, a week where we connect with different segments of society to remind us of our obligations as citizens, as well as the guidelines set out for entrenching and securing our democracy. Indeed, as a commission, we are constantly reminded, particularly during Constitution Week, of our key functions outlined in Article 233 of the 19th Constitution, the first of which states, and I quote, "The Commission is to create and sustain within society the awareness of the principles and objectives of this Constitution as the fundamental law of the people of Ghana." This year, 2022, is auspicious in the history of our republic, as it marks 30 years of uninterrupted constitutional rule in the Fourth Republic. The NCCE holds the view, and I'm sure we can all agree, that having continuous constitutional rule for 30 years is a milestone that must be celebrated, particularly in view of our checkered political history and the overthrow of 3 previous Republican constitutions. In spite of any shortcomings of the 1992 Constitution or deficits of our democracy, we as a nation and a people have come a long way. However, that is not to suggest that there's no room for improvement. And 30 years later is perhaps a good time to pause and reflect on how far we have come and consider any steps, if necessary, to ensure our Constitution continues to be fit for purpose and carries the aspirations of our people as we head into the future. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, do permit me to highlight the major activities the NCCE is carrying out across the country to commemorate the 30-year anniversary of the 1992 Fourth Republican Constitution. We kick off our commemoration activities with a headline event actually happening right now, this most important public lecture on the theme, "After 3 decades of democratic rule under the 1992 Constitution, revisiting the agenda for constitutional reforms." Our main speaker, who will be introduced shortly, was actually a member of the Constitutional Review Committee, and we are honored and grateful to have him here and for accepting to give the lecture. After today's event and in the coming weeks, the NCCE will hold similar dialogues in each of the regional capitals on the same theme, and we will compile highlights and insights from these public lectures and other engagements lined up to feed the national discussion on this topic. At the district level, the Commission will engage identifiable groups, including the security services, on the above theme. To ensure that young people are not left out of this celebration, 10,000 basic schools across the country will be engaged on the sub-theme, "Sustaining Our Democracy, Ghanaian Values in Practice," with the aim to ignite the spirit of patriotism and respect for core national values such as discipline, trustworthiness, integrity, and loyalty. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you will bear me out that in the course of operating the 1992 Constitution over the past 30 years, various segments of the Ghanaian society have called for a review of the document. Indeed, in 2010, a review process commenced with the setup of the Constitutional Review Committee. Subsequent to the work of the Commission and the white paper that gave guidelines for its implementation, not much has been done. Yet there is a sense in recent times that citizens want to revisit the issue. Various segments of Ghanaian society, including legislators, political parties, academics, civil society organizations, and constitutional experts have called for constitutional reforms, and there have been many public discussions on how to actually go through with it. Through today's lecture, the NCCE is adding its voice to calls by these noble groups of people and also appealing for a comprehensive national debate on constitutional reforms as well as a roadmap for execution. As the constitutionally mandated body to educate citizens on the 1992 Constitution, NCCE will work closely with any process that is set up to lead the way on this issue. As citizens, we are all enjoined under Article 3.4 to uphold and defend the Constitution and resist any person or group of persons who seek to overturn or suspend it. At the same time, we understand that the Constitution must evolve in order to remain relevant and continue to meet the aspirations of the people. This is why it is imperative that citizens form an integral part of any reform process. The framers of the Constitution actually anticipated a time like this and hence outlined clear procedures for amendments within the Constitution itself. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we must fearlessly and unequivocally reject the purveyors of chaos who advocate for the disorderly overthrow of the Constitution. As a people, we must rather seize the opportunity presented by the times we find ourselves in and come together to develop a roadmap for reforms if we find it necessary to do so. On behalf of the Commission, I welcome all of you to the main lecture of the 2022 Annual Constitution Week celebration and call on all present to pay attention to presentations and discussions and to actively contribute to this event, reflect, add voices, and hopefully from today we will see the start of a new process that will lead us to a point where we get the Constitution we desire. Thank you very much. God bless our homeland, Ghana.
Thank you very much, Madam Kathy. Let's do it well for her. This is NCCE's 2022 Annual Constitution Week celebration. You are all welcome. Joining us are the Public Services Commission, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, UTAG, Willowmain, Head of Civil Service, National Commission on Culture. You are all welcome. So on this note, I'll hand over to our moderator, Mr. Samson Ladi Ayenini, to continue from here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning. Thank you very much. This is the most important place to be this morning. Do you agree with me? Yes, first of all, we owe our existence to God. But as a nation, we are created by the Constitution, literally. So without the Constitution, you can go to Genesis, where there was a void. and there was a vacuum that had to be filled. It took the Constitution to fill that. So if it has sustained us up till this point, we should acknowledge the NCCE once again with a round of applause for an important occasion such as this. We will begin by bringing up here for the keynote address to be delivered, and it's going to be delivered by a man with many qualities, but for now we all seem to have confined him to one, which he has been delivering so well. Justice Gabriel Kwaman is a serving judge of the Supreme Court of Ghana. He was appointed on the 29th of May 2015. Prior to his appointment, he was in private practice as a lawyer heading a law firm, Kwaman and Associates, for 27 years. Before his elevation, he served as a member of the Constitution Review Commission, you've heard about that, set up in 2010, which held nationwide consultations on the strengths and weaknesses of the 1992 Constitution and gave us a 1,000-page document, which we have often called the most expansive socio-political data that this country could ever gather about itself. Aside the Constitution Review or reform process of Ghana, Justice Gabriel Kwaman was involved in similar processes in Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. As Supreme Court Justice, he has authored opinions of the court in a number of seminal cases involving substantial questions of law, including, as you may have become aware of recently, the question of marital property. In Raphael Kubaje versus Michael Yeboah and Asari and others, he gave us the legal light on the right of privacy under the 1992 Constitution. In Asante versus the Republic, 2017 to 2019, one Supreme Court of Ghana law report, he dealt with the use of DNA evidence in sexual offenses cases. In Ebusuapenyin Intiako Kobina versus Ahanta Traditional Council and another, 2017-2018, he dealt with the issue of nullifying decisions of inferior tribunals by actions commenced by writ of summons as against Sechirairai. And in Bimbila Skin, in the same year, he dealt with the issue of estopel as a ground for claiming entitlement to a chieftain's skin or stool. In February 2020, Justice Kwaman represented Ghana's judiciary at an international judiciary conference held in New Delhi, India, and presented a paper on modern trends in privacy of persons in the digital age. He currently chairs a number of committees in the Judicial Service of Ghana, including the Editorial Committee, which is in charge of official publications of the judiciary, the Judges and Magistrates Performance Monitoring Committee, and the Appointments Committee. He was the vice chairman of the committee that drew up the 5-year strategic plan for the judiciary, and he is presently member of the Judicial Council and the dreaded General Legal Council. He is also the chairman of the board of directors of the Council of Law Reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and privileged to present to you our speaker, His Lordship Justice Gabriel Kwaman of the Supreme Court of Ghana. My Lord, please. Yes, that's it. Okay. Sorry. Please continue clapping. Obviously, from his rich background in his interaction with the Constitution, in his interaction with the Constitution, we clearly have the right person this morning.
The acting chairperson and members of the National Commission for Civic Education, discussants, guests, the media, ladies and gentlemen. I feel honored to have been nominated by the Honorable Chief Justice, His Lordship Enini Yeboah, to give this talk in his stead on the subject of amendments to the 1992 Constitution of Ghana. The choice of my good self for this assignment is undoubtedly on account of my previous association with the Ghana Constitution review processes commenced in 2010 by the distinguished President of the Republic at the time, the late Professor J.E. Atta Mills. It is my sincere hope that the brief comments I shall make here would contribute positively to the quest for a more rewarding and deeper transparent democratic governance in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, given our checkered constitutional history, where every effort at the constitutional experiment since independence was until recently marred by one or other form of military or military cum police insurrection, it is no mean achievement to have lived under uninterrupted constitutional rule for 3 continuous decades. With a constitution that has survived this long, it is a welcome undertaking to engage in healthy and enlightened discussion on the workings of the Constitution with a view to unearthing its weaknesses and strengths. Therefore, the recent remarkable consistency with which discussions about the Constitution have been embarked on by actors at various levels of our national life is in itself very laudable. These discussions, apart from engendering higher commitment to the principles of our Constitution and compelling strict observance of them by persons who are entrusted with statutory authority, they also point out areas of the Constitution that do not appear to be working smoothly and need modification. It is in this sense that the NCCE deserves utmost commendation for organizing this high-level national conversation, which should serve to direct the discussions about constitutional reforms towards achieving some concrete goals. It has been stated with authority by the Supreme Court of Ghana that a written constitution ought to be seen as a living organism which is capable of growth and development. See 24 verses Attorney General, 1980 Ghana Law Report 637. Therefore, it is normal that with the effluxion of time, a constitutional document would need to change to reflect its growth and development. This reality was not lost on the framers of the 1992 Constitution. Consequently, they devoted the whole of Chapter 25 of the Constitution to making comprehensive provisions on processes and procedures for amending both the entrenched and non-entrenched provisions of the Constitution. Nonetheless, as the Constitution is the supreme law that lies at the top of the normative pyramid of our legal system, it must not be subject to frequent and trifling amendments, lest its sanctity whittles away. As was explained in 24 verses Attorney General, the Constitution is a solemn legal document, political and developmental in nature. It is designed to reflect past values, regulate the present, and inspire the future of the nation. It provides for the longings and aspirations of the people for the realization of a better and fuller life, while making provision for a framework of governance necessary to achieve these objectives. However, society is not static, and what the aspirations of our nations were considered to be in 1992 may change with time. While we as a people are occupied with the uninterrupted application of the Constitution, some of our collective values disintegrate and are replaced by new ones. Some political priorities get overtaken by others, and some previously perceived urgent challenges cease to cause the anxiety that they created in 1992. In that connection, the Constitution must be reasonably stable enough to readjust to new realities of changing values and national priorities. It is an established democratic principle that judges, through the power of judicial interpretation, are permitted to interpret and apply a written constitution, such as ours, in a manner that reflects and gives effect to changing priorities, values, and national focus. However, the scope of judicial interpretation as a means for accommodating deserving changes to a constitution is highly restricted in matters where a particular policy choice has been expressly stated in the language of the text of a constitution. In the Supreme Court case of Republic versus Fast Track High Court, ex parte Daniels, 2003-2004 Supreme Court of Ghana Law Report, Kluje JSC said as follows, quote, "We cannot, under the cloak of constitutional interpretation, rewrite the Constitution of Ghana. Even in the area of statutory interpretation, we cannot amend a piece of legislation because we dislike its terms or because we suppose that the lawgiver was mistaken or unwise. Our responsibility is greater when we interpret the Constitution. We cannot and must not substitute our wisdom for the collective wisdom of the framers of the Constitution," unquote. The other limitation of constitutional amendment by judicial interpretation is that what judges may perceive as a new drift of national consensus may be disputed. Certain times, when the Supreme Court renders a decision that appears to dictate a particular policy choice said to be the intention of the framers of the Constitution, some vociferous sections of the society would challenge it and insist that the opposite of what the court said is a better policy choice for the country. To this end, I believe that while judicial interpretation may have a role in aligning our Constitution in penumbral areas left out of the constitutional text, since a Constitution cannot set out every conceivable circumstance and provide for it, after 30 years of existence, our Constitution requires certain significant reforms that can only be accomplished by resort to the amendment procedure in Chapter 25 of the Constitution. Gladly, the work of the Constitution Review Commission in 2010 resulted in a comprehensive report. While I do not intend to go through the findings and recommendations of the CRC, for they are well documented, it bears pointing out at least 3 key points of dissatisfaction Ghanaians expressed about the workings of the 1992 Constitution at the time of the consultations. These were: 1, deficit in transparent governance despite changing from dictatorship to constitutional rule in 1992. 2, continuous high levels of public sector corruption and lack of accountability for revenue from natural resource exploitation. 3, non-realization of real democratic dividend in the form of accelerated national development promised as attainable under constitutional rule. These were 3 key areas that Ghanaians said the Constitution had not lived up to what they expected. I will discuss the work of the CRC later on, but let me make the point here that since those consultations, Ghanaians continue to register their grievances with the governance under the 1992 Constitution and to call for amendments. The calls for constitutional reforms are getting louder of late and have spread to involve the younger generation whose persistent failure to see a better future ahead of them after continuous changes of government appears to explain their awakening. It has dawned on many observers that as a nation we require something deeper than changing governments under the same constitution, and that we need to take a hard look at the governance framework under our constitution. For example, earlier this year, the immediate past chairperson of the NCCE, Mrs. Josephine Nkrumah, in a press release on Constitution Day, acknowledged that despite the remarkable achievements of the Constitution, there is the need for a reform and improvement of the constitutional infrastructure. And I quote her, "This will help tackle constitutional deficits and aspects of the 1992 Constitution that seemingly breed apathy from the public, disengages the public in major aspects of governance at the grassroots and national levels, further deepens marginalization, promotes excessive power of the executive, and festers the cause of corruption," unquote. I think the current chairperson made similar observations. Ladies and gentlemen, the momentum that surrounds the recent calls for constitutional amendment must not be brushed off or given little consideration. There seems to be a new spirit of constitutional consciousness rising among us, the likes of which have never been experienced in this country. We need to open our ears widely to the loud whispers of this spirit and be sensitive to its guidance if we are to achieve a better quality of life for Ghanaians. But it must be stated that the need for constitutional amendment was noticed shortly after the birth of the Constitution in 1992. When we commenced operating according to its provisions, we immediately realized that some of the policy choices made in the document were not playing out coherently as expected, and that led to the amendments of 1996, less than half a decade after the Constitution came into force. The 1996 amendments included providing for dual citizenship, which was barred in the original Constitution, changing the gratuities regime for members of Parliament, the inclusion of representatives of the National Commission on Women and Development, the Trade Union Congress, and the Association of Private Brokers in the National Media Commission. The 1996 amendments also made the President or his nominee the chairperson of the Armed Forces Council, rather than the Vice President, who was made the automatic chairperson of the Council in the original Constitution. Less than a decade and a half later, in 2010, the Constitution Review Commission, under the chairmanship of Professor Emeritus Albert Kojo Fiajo, was established. The commission was tasked to ascertain from the people of Ghana their views on the operation of the 1992 Constitution, particularly its strengths and weaknesses, and to articulate the concerns of the people on amendments that may be required for a comprehensive review of the Constitution, and to make recommendations to the government for consideration and provide draft bills for possible amendments to the Constitution. The Commission carried out its mandate to the fullest extent and submitted its reports and recommendations to the government in December 2011. In June 2012, the government issued a white paper on the report of the Commission, in which it accepted most of the recommendations of the Commission. Subsequent to that, a 5-member Constitution Review Implementation Committee was set up by the government in October 2012 to drive the implementation of the recommended amendments in accordance with Chapter 25 of the Constitution. In spite of these significant strides towards amending the Constitution, we are yet to move the process to its logical end by Cabinet approving any constitutional amendment bills, forwarding them to the Council of State for the process under Chapter 25 to pan out. There is no doubt that the final process of amendments would definitely require the cooperation of both sides of Parliament. And I want to believe that there are some areas of proposed amendments that the major political parties, through their election manifestos, express consensus on. These include reforms to the local governance structure spelled out in the Constitution, and bringing backwards the date for general elections so as to provide sufficient time for a president-elect to constitute his government after elections. Changes to the local government system would deconcentrate the power over public resources, which is presently vested at the center, especially at the presidency, and enhance the authority of lower-tier political structures to exact greater accountability for budgetary funds ostensibly allocated for development of their area of jurisdiction. In the area of local government reforms, it seems to me that what is needed for reform is political will. Since the provisions of the Constitution on local government are largely unentrenched, and the mechanics for amending them does not involve a referendum. Considerable attention needs to be paid to the torrents of recent calls for constitutional amendments sweeping across the country, from religious leaders, civil society to politicians. Not only must the calls for amendment be given significant primacy, the necessary steps must be taken towards implementing constitutional reforms. As at the time the 1996 amendments were made, the Constitution had not lived that long, but as there was political will, some important changes were quickly made, and I believe those changes enabled the Constitution to deal with challenges that would still have been with us today if they had not been made then. Now, we have had enough time to assess the Constitution better, and studies have been conducted by academics, consultations undertaken on a wide basis. So we have no viable excuse to continue to hold back on effecting the necessary changes. It is relevant to note that one remarkable characteristic of the present calls for amendment is that all actors involved, political parties, civil society groups, and academics, agree that there is a need for some adjustments to be made to the Constitution. The divisions arise only around the extent which those divisions should cover. Whereas others call for a complete overhaul of the whole document, some are of the more minimalist approach, requiring the amendments of particular provisions. To those who call for the total overhaul, my advice is that there is no one-size-fits-all in democratic governance structure the world over. I say democratic governance structure because some others make calls for total change of the Constitution as if they have a problem with even the basic structure of the Constitution, including the human rights provisions. But it must not be easily forgotten that we framed the 1992 Constitution the way it is on the back of our political experience from pre-independence time. Some critics of our Constitution quote philosophical principles on democracy propounded in the 18th century and compare our Constitution to those of other countries and conclude that our Constitution is not democratic. However, whilst it is always good to learn from other people's experience, we should not underrate the thinking that informed our constitutional structure, which, if it has done nothing for us at all, it has kept us together as one nation without military intervention for 30 years so far. The stable constitutions we keep referring to took centuries to attain their stability through sustained efforts by consensus political actors. In my personal opinion as a citizen of Ghana, the governance deficits under the 1992 Constitution I referred to above can be remedied by creative constitution-making processes without a complete change of the structure of our Constitution. Some time passed, a lot of commentators thought that the manner we structured our legislature under the 1992 Constitution made Parliament subservient to the executive, until the parliamentary election results of 2020 and the election of Speaker thereafter made them to revise their notes. The present composition of the legislature has posed some challenges to the speed with which government is able to actualize its plans. But it has equally hinted at the potential strength of our Constitution as far as the power of Parliament to hold the executive accountable is concerned. The framers of the 1992 Constitution must have foreseen this possibility and even other more challenging party permutations in Parliament. And they must have believed that we would exhibit the requisite democratic temperament on all sides of Parliament and scale over the challenges. It takes time to learn new rules when things change, such as we have confronting us with our current Parliament. But I am confident we shall overcome. Rome was not built in a day. So, I will conclude by suggesting that we should respond to the renewed calls for reforms by moving forward the 2010 process, starting with an identification of areas of apparent consensus indicated in the election manifestos of the major political parties, and galvanizing the resources and energies of civil society around this. I sincerely hope that such renewed effort would afford space for the arising young energetic civil society groups such as #FixTheCountry to influence the course of changing their future by channeling their creativity as the younger generation into results-oriented consultations. Thank you very much. Yes, I think we
do better than that. My Lord Justice Foreman, we thank you so very much for giving us a lot to chew on as we begin the discussion on the amendment agenda for the 1992 Constitution. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I'd like to let us please keep clapping as my Lord takes his seat down here, right, so that we have our panelists come up the podium and take their seats for the discussion to begin. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Set me free.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. And for those of you who have joined us via the NCCE's social media handles, remember that at the tail end of the panel discussion, we will open the forum for you to also be able to participate, not only the participants who are here seated in this hall, and that is the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the STRAJ, the presence of those of you from the Ministry of Transport, ISODEC, the Ministry of Chieftaincy, the National Catholic Secretariat, and the Civil Service Council. Of course, the Office of the Minister responsible for Parliamentary Affairs is also equally represented here this morning. Not only the First Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, can we, without much ado, welcome up stage Dr. Alidu Seidu. Dr. Alidu Seidu is lecturer, Political Science Department of the University of Ghana. You've heard him many times held the national discussion on shaping the Constitution and its various aspects. Dr. Alidu Seidu, please come up and take your seat. We are also, we also have Clara Berry Kasati, Mrs. She is lecturer in law at the School of Law, University of Ghana. Previously, she taught at the Gimpa Law School. Clara, thank you very much for making the time to join us on this very important occasion. Clara is in active private legal practice, and many of us may remember the photographs in the Daily Graphic many years ago capturing her as the overall best student at the Ghana Law School. That's how she graduated. In fact, graduating as a mother and a wife. A round of applause for that. Also here is Professor Henry Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director, Center for Democratic Development, CDD, Ghana. And Professor Prempeh has been involved in the Constitution for a very long time. He has taught constitutional law, including in Sitting Hall in the University, Sitting Hall University in the United States of America. He has been involved in the process of constitution making and advising governments across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, these are your panelists. A round of applause for them once again. And whilst I get mic'd, I will begin on the very first question. Justice Puaman gave us a latitude, but among other things, he said that we seem to have been awoken to a realization that the dividends of democracy will not be gained by merely changing political parties to preside over the states under the same constitution. I'd like to start with Dr. Alidu Seidu. What does that mean to you in the context of revisiting the constitution reform agenda?
Thank you so much. And thank you to NCCE for putting this together. And thank you to our listeners and then those viewing us from home. The essence of government is to create an enabling environment for people to realize their potential and to live a life full of choice. The Constitution provides the guiding principle upon which this vision is realized. And the Constitution also provides for the division of power among state institutions and providing the enabling environment for these institutions to to act in the ways that support the letter and spirit of the Constitution. Political parties contest and win elections with the intention to activate the wishes of the people as is enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution is a living institution, one of the greatest institutions of all times. But when you go back to the literature on institutionalism, there is one of the enabling outcomes in institutional processes that where institutions stand the way of powerful actors, especially elites, they may or they will set aside or manipulate institutions to be able to meet their personal interests. So, having a constitution, no matter how structured, well documented, and detailed it is, does not necessarily mean that political party actors, politicians, and elites will at all times obey or follow the spirit and letter of the Constitution. So that is why the issue of constitutional order is very important when we talk about Constitution. The constitutional order is the unflinching commitment to implementing the letter and spirit of the Constitution at all times. Even in situations where it is the provisions of the Constitution is against the interests of political parties, they will still respect that element of Constitution. And it is also very clear in democratic governance, what we call habitualization. It is the stage of democratic development where citizens and political actors obey, speak, act in the manner in which the Constitution prescribes for them. So over the years, the practice of democracy under this Constitution for 30 years has actually exposed most of the flaws and then the weaknesses that politicians are able to exploit and able to meet their demands. So I agree to the submission of his lordship, right, that the fact that we have the 1992 Constitution does not necessarily mean that political parties that come and go will follow the provisions of the Constitution in letter and spirit. There may be cases where they may want to manipulate, they may want to circumvent, they may even want to step the Constitution aside to be able to get what they want. So constant reinforcement and practicing the watchdog role of both citizens, state institutions, and the media is likely going to put them in the right order if they do want to change that element of Constitution which doesn't support them. So it is just one of the ways, not just having the Constitution, but taking the grand effort to make sure that the provisions of the Constitutions are respected at all times, whether one's interest is going to be promoted or undermined. That's one of the best ways we can generate and sustain a democracy that will move us forward, and to support a Constitution no matter how long it has served the interests of the people.
Right. We'll assess the Constitution for the 3 decades so far. But Clara, the observation by His Lordship in this context, the context of revisiting the agenda for reform after 3 decades of operating this Constitution, will suggest that something definitely needs to change about the Constitution if we will reap the dividends of the democracy. How do you take that statement in light of suggestions that it is good people that make good constitutions?
Thank you very much, Samson. Thank you to the NCCC, NCCE, and the acting chair, Kathleen, for organizing this. Thank you very much to His Lordship, Justice Palman, Justice of the Supreme Court, for his speech, which I agree very largely with. Now, do good people make good constitutions? Before I answer that question, let me give a background. Now, we all decided at the dawn of 1992 that we had had enough. We know our checkered history. We had decided that we had had enough with dictatorship. We had had enough with constitutional rule, and we wanted to go back to the Constitution. So we came up with the 1992 Constitution. We agreed that we wanted to go back to democracy. If there's anything I've always loved about the Ghanaian people, it is that right even before independence, the Ghanaian people have always wanted self-governance that involves everybody and for everybody. And if you look at the structure of the 1992 Constitution, you can see this clearly throughout the provisions of the 1992 Constitution right from the beginning. But the question then becomes, who makes a good constitution? A people who want a particular form of governance for themselves. Must they be good or bad? They will be good and bad, because in every society, you always have good people, you always have bad people. The Ghanaian people are no exception. So the Ghanaian people are not different from any other people in the world or on the continent who have had various forms of governance. It is precisely for that reason that we need a constitution, because the constitution sets a framework for all of us. There is a little bit of truth in the saying that good people make good constitution. I say a little bit, not entirely. The reason I say a little bit is that you need certain values within both the citizenry and their leaders for the constitution to work the way it was designed to. We will come to the assessment of the Constitution. We do have certain problems with certain aspects of the Constitution, certainly not the whole or all the aspects of the Constitution, but certain aspects. If you look at some of the issues that we have, for example, accountability, sometimes it is not just because of the letter of the Constitution. Sometimes it is also the values with which we practice the Constitution. So if you have leadership that espouses certain values, and you have citizens that are willing to live up to certain values, you will have a better working constitution than we currently have. Even the present 1992 Constitution, there are certain aspects of the Constitution that are good already, but which we are not implementing or living up to, probably because of the kinds of values that we aspire to. I will take an example, inclusion. If you look at our 1992 Constitution, certainly you can see a clear intention for inclusion of all the Ghanaian people, as His Lordship Justice Poamang noted. Apart from that, the values of accountability. In spite of the hard letter of the word, it is a value. But let me just digress a little bit from the Constitution and come to us as a people. What values lead us? Leave the 1992 Constitution aside. We all belong to various groups, even WhatsApp groups. How easy is it for you in your WhatsApp group to hold your leadership in that group accountable? Remember that in your WhatsApp group, it is not the 1992 Constitution that is holding your hands. In the various associations that we belong to, how do we hold leadership in those groups accountable? In our daily lives, how do we do it? Because when we come to that, we don't have the excuse that it is the 1992 Constitution that is holding our hands. But we would realize that there are certain times that even I have come from experience, you see that even where law hasn't kind of backed you down, people back themselves down because of the kinds of values that they espouse. So we do need to work on our Constitution, but we do also need to work on our values. And I keep saying that just the Constitution alone and complaining about the Constitution alone is not going to solve the problem. Right. We must also be committed to living up certain values and making sure that those values are actualized through the Constitution and the other legal framework that we have. Right. So yes, to a little bit, good people in that context do make good constitutions. But as a whole, like I said, in every society, in every human society, you are always going to have good people. You are always going to have bad people. So you are not going to find anywhere all the people being good. It is for that specific purpose that we need law and we need a constitution.
Right. Professor Kwesi Prempeh, this is a profound quotation that has been used many times in many of our constitutional cases. And His Lordship Justice Poamang referred to
a portion of it again, that is Tufo versus Attorney General. In the very recent Abdullahi case that has clarified the question and giving the Deputy Speaker of Parliament the opportunity to, as it were, vote and preside, it was referred to as well. The court said, a written constitution such as ours is not an ordinary act of parliament, not an ordinary act of parliament. It embodies the will of a people. It also mirrors their history. Account, therefore, needs to be taken of its landmark in a people's search for progress. It contains within it their aspirations and their hopes for a better and fuller life. First, it is not an ordinary act of parliament. Second, it embodies the will of the people. It mirrors their history. It also projects their search for progress. But more importantly, it contains their aspirations, their hopes, and their hopes for a better and fuller life. Is the Constitution the central point that determines that the dividends of democracy are gained?
Good question. I think we came to our Constitution, the point that made eloquently by distinguished justice, co-panelists. We came to this Constitution after many, many years of trial and error. Several coups d'etat, discontinuity in government, and I think we came to a certain learning and realization that that kind of experience was standing in the way of our national progress, of our development. Too many coups breed counter coups. They've breed social division because one side feels wronged in the event that led to the overthrow, and then they become antagonistic to the regime almost for its entire life. So you have these divisions in society. So at the dawn of the 1990s, we came to a certain sense that we did not want to be governed this way. So we moved towards a democratic regime. I think one of the big expectations was that for some of us, democracy is an inherent good, right? There's something about democracy that is virtuous in itself, right? The idea of being governed by people you have chosen is itself a good. But there are many others who also look to a constitution, or to democracy for that matter, to produce certain other things, material dividends, how the resources of the country are harnessed and distributed and used and managed. So there were developmental expectations also accompanying our shift to democracy. And I think when Justice Poaman made the point that it would appear that for some, those other expectations had not been met, then you would ask yourself, is it the Constitution to which we must look for that? The answer is not a binary yes or no answer. It's not a binary yes or no. The Constitution does create a framework, right? But the Constitution can also create certain incentives, right, for government, for politics, for politicians to be inclined towards development. Because what constitutions do basically is the things that they regulate are there, but the things they don't regulate, who fills the gap? It's politics. So the Constitution knows that you cannot dictate everything in that document. So it leaves room for democracy, everyday politics, to also do its work. That is why we go to elect governments, so that governments will compete for our mandate to do certain things. And I think even going to Afrobarometer, because I'm speaking as Executive Director of CDD, Afrobarometer has actually given us some important data that through consistent surveys that we have done in Ghana, but also across Africa, demand for democracy has held very strong. Citizen demand for democracy. And we ask them questions like, given a choice of electing your own government, and then given an array of other alternatives, which ones would you prefer? Consistently, Africans, and especially Ghanaians, choose democracy. Okay. Yet we have also discovered from Afrobarometer that citizens are telling us they are disappointed with their governments that they elect. So we probe further, and what we have concluded is that while demand for democracy is high and has stayed very high, the supply of democracy, what we call the supply of it, which is what our elected governments give us with the democracy that we have trusted them with the power we've trusted them with, what they give us back in dividends, in public services, in liberties, we are not satisfied with that, right? So there's a gap here, an expectations gap that citizens are saying they are not getting. And to that extent, I think when you listen to people clamor for constitutional review, part of that clamor is driven by this gap in expectation that, in fact, while we like electing our leaders, while we like going to the polls every 4 years to choose MP and president and the like, we remain disappointed. We are still expecting more. It hasn't delivered a lot of the goods that we are expecting from the, from the democracy. So you see, increasingly, people are looking to alternatives. We, in our own region, the same gaps that we discovered. In Mali, we discovered that. In Guinea, we discovered that. And in those countries, that provides sometimes an opportunity in confluence with other factors, provides a gap for some people to say, well, then let's overthrow the constitution. Right. The real difficulty is, to what extent can you blame a constitution for not delivering on development goods? All right. Right? Our constitution gives us certain things we could use to get development. The first one is, of course, the right to choose your government. Competing governments come with a platform, and you, the people, if you are minded about your own circumstances, you can choose based on your situation, your conditions, your preferences, which governments will give you development and which ones would not. And you can deselect them if they fail to do that. That's an important developmental power that we have. The Constitution also tries, in our case, gives us, certain institutions, National Development Planning Commission, certain social and economic rights that governments are obligated to fulfill, directive principles of state policy. So there's a little nod towards development. The rest of the task is to be done by us, by citizens. And I think in the demanding part, right, if you take your role as a citizen to be, I go cast my vote once every 4 years. I spend the rest of my time politicking within my party, and I expect that development would happen. That is going to disappoint. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You can't just, stand on the sidelines and witness and expect development to happen. Nor is it just actually going on the air and talking. Right? So you see that while we have the freedom of speech, for some citizens, that has become a substitute for activism. You go on Newsfile and you vent. You go on radio and you vent. You say, well, I've spoken my mind. But if you're not actively demanding accountability, actively asking questions of your representatives, where are the resources of the country that we entrusted to you? What are they being used for? The Constitution, for example, gives a very important phrase. It says, all public lands and all minerals in the country are vested in the president on behalf of and in trust for the people of Ghana. Sometimes I ask myself, what have Ghanaians as citizens, the beneficiaries of this trust, what have they asked or demanded of the trustee? How do we demand accountability from the trustee? Do we ask, Mr. President, this year, what have you used the gold resources of the country for? As a trustee, in common law, if you're a trustee or you're a fiduciary, you must account to the citizenry or the beneficiaries for the use of the trust.
I suppose that
right?
accounting happens in Parliament.
Sure. So you can also say, you can also go through your representatives that you've elected and say, hey, you are supposed to demand accountability for the use of gold, for the use of lithium, for the use of bauxite or diamonds. How have the proceeds been used? That's what a trustee does.
All right.
Right? But also not just our parliament. And I think that's part of the problem. We are falling into this risk of a delegative democracy in which we vote once every 4 years and we delegate it to the people we elect and watch them play the game.
Right.
And then we sit back for another 4 years to happen. We have to participate.
I'm coming to ask for all of you to, in 1 minute, tell us whether or not, as has been repeatedly referred to in that landmark decision, that the Constitution is a living organism capable of development, to suggest that we actually do not need to amend it. It will work for us. That's what it's supposed to be. The question about voting and going to sleep, why not? Because in the Directive Principles of State Policy, in Chapter 6 in the Constitution, it compels the executive and all other arms of government to ensure that there is development, and actually puts an obligation on them to ensure a sound and healthy economy in which we are all beneficiaries. So why must we compel and continue in a process of participation to get the dividends of the democracy? In a minute, I want to pick your view on that and then come to ask the question of your assessment of this Constitution in 3 decades. So starting with you, Prof. The Constitution is capable of development. It's a living organism. We don't need to be amending it.
Well, I think that that language, of course, is in the context of a constitutional case. It's a judge saying it, right? So when judges say that the Constitution is a living document, they are also telling us that as judges, they can, through the process of interpretation, help the Constitution to grow in a certain direction. It does not mean, and I like the point that Justice Puaman made, that there are limits to judicial review or to the judicial power. Where a clear policy choice has been made in the Constitution, judges cannot sit in judgment and rewrite the Constitution. They will say, well, it doesn't look great, but this is what we got. Right? In a sense, this is what the judges in Riakoto were telling us. That, look, it doesn't look great, but this is the Constitution that we have, and that is what we have to live with. That is a realization. I mean, in all humility, judges must be able to say that. Right? It does not mean that we can't amend the Constitution. What they are also telling us is that we have limits. If you think the Constitution is not working in other ways, go to the amendment procedure and then use it to amend the Constitution. But the point you are making about, so we have directive principles of state policy, it compels government to do this. I think there's a sense in which a constitution is somewhat naive. Every constitution is, because it is an inert document. It has to account for the fact that it is not self-enforcing. Human beings will run it. Political parties will run it. And so a constitution can set out the ideal, but then the operationalization is where the tire meets the road, right? And in that process, clearly our human nature comes out, sociology plays out, a lot of other things get in the way, right? So the deficits, some of the deficits that we're seeing between the ideal in the Constitution and the reality on the ground are just basically the fact that constitutions cannot self-enforce. They must leave it to fallible humans, self-interested politicians, self-interested parties to enforce it. And that is why citizens, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of government, of good government, must always be up and doing, because your delegates, your representatives, your elected officials may not always do good by you.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll return for your assessment and why we should be on this agenda of constitution reform, if it's necessary at all. So, Clara, the this phrase has been used over and again. It's become a cliche. It's a living organism. It is capable of growth and development. Do we need to be talking about amending it?
Samson, 3 quick points. Do we need to be talking about amending it? Yes. The reason I say yes is that the Constitution was made by human beings. Constitutions everywhere are made by human beings. They don't drop from the skies. They are made by human beings, our forefathers, who are fallible just like you and me, and who lived within a certain era. Things change. At the time that we had the 1992 Constitution, we didn't even have social media as we have to. There are a lot of things that change. So generally everywhere with time, there are certain things that may not work for us as a people again. And that is why even the Constitution provides within itself how it can be amended. So even though they are living documents, they can be amended. And the second point is, yes, part of democracy, which is what our Constitution guarantees for us, is the limitation on powers. So every arm of government has its limitations. And as His Lordship noted, the limitation of the judiciary in this case is to interpret, not to make. We have decided that it is elected officials who will make law. So that even when the law needs amendment, it is the same elected officials who will still go back and amend the law. It is not open to the judiciary to be the ones amending laws because they think this law is not good enough. That's not the role of the judiciary. But there are certain gray areas that the judiciary can, through interpretation, reflect the values in the Constitution. So to that extent, yes, the Constitution is a living document. But has the Constitution can it enforce itself? Is a Constitution by itself capable of development? For me, it's an absolute no.
All right.
This is the Constitution. Has it got hands and legs? If we put it down anywhere, will it change? And I keep telling my students, my law students and my constitutional class in functional law, that the Constitution, if you leave it the way it is, it's just a piece of paper. It is us and the way we implement it, both leadership and citizens, who are the arms and legs and the brain of the Constitution. And it is to that extent that we can make it live. So if it has to live, it's up to you and I as to how it lives.
We'll come to your assessment in 3 decades and why there is a need to continue in this reform agenda. Yes, Dr. Ali Duseidu. It's a living document, it's capable of growth and development. We go and vote people. So the people of Bekwai said, among all the people that are interested in becoming MP, it is Joseph Osei-Wusu that we find to be the best. He's a good person. They vote for him. And still, they can't trust that he will deliver the goods for them. Why?
The ability to grow, live long, or die depend on the environment in which they live. So the environment is very important. Even if the Constitution is adjudged to be a living document, its growth and sustainability and expansion is within the environment in which it finds itself. So it is basically a guiding framework that is supposed to superintend over developmental processes. And as a guiding document, there are a lot of things that it can do and it cannot do. And that is the reason why even when constitutions are drafted, no matter how good it is, there is still a provision for what? Amendment and a provision for reforms moving forward. The Constitution was drafted within a context, our historical past, prevailing current dynamics, and perhaps the anticipation that it may hold forth for future development moving forward. But it is not everything that will happen in the future that we can predict. There are a lot of known unknowns. So when the known unknowns begin to manifest, and it now becomes very difficult for the Constitution to grow within that environment, then there's the need for us to be able to reflect and see how we can amend. Granted that it is a living document and can do a lot of things, citizens still have to make a lot of demands. The struggles approach to development. So the fact that we anticipated that this was what is going to happen, or this is what the Constitution is going to do, and the Constitution is not able to do it, citizens have the right to make demands. And I believe that's why we go to the Supreme Court to seek interpretation of some provisions maybe where there were a little bit of ambiguity. So it is the same way even in electing our leadership. We do not just elect our leadership because we believe that, not because we believe that they can deliver, but even when we elect them and circumstances don't permit them to deliver, or they are unwilling to deliver, we still have the authority as people to be able to vote them out or to be able to speak to them in a manner that will make them live up to our expectation. So I think that no matter how good the Constitution is, it works within an environment. And once the environment begins to change, then there's a need to have a second look at that particular document and see how we can align it to the changing dynamics so that we live a very prosperous life as a state.
Thank you. Now, Prof, this is an area of comfort for you. People have spoken about the oldest constitutions of the world, and there's often reference to the United States of America, 1788, Netherlands, 1814, Norway, 1814, Belgium, 1831, Denmark, 18... Why are we so preoccupied with amending our constitutions 30 years on? How far has it fared, and why should it be subject to an amendment?
So we continue to call the U.S. Constitution, we continue to date it from 1789, even though it has gone through many, many amendments. You know, within its first 10 years, they had to add the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. There was no Bill of Rights when the U.S. Constitution was first adopted, and within a matter of a few years, they realized that was a big omission. So they had to. So it's been amended many, many times.
Okay.
We continue to call it 1789 Constitution because it's not been overthrown.
All right.
So we will continue to call our Constitution the 1992 Constitution, notwithstanding the amendments that we make. And I think that we should separate a Constitution's longevity from its intrinsic merit as a document. When we say the Constitution of Ghana 1992 is the longest lasting constitution, I don't think we should attribute the longevity to the Constitution itself. It is as if to say that the other constitutions before it, including notably the 1979 Constitution, were inferior documents. In fact, to the contrary, many people, students of constitutional law and of constitutions, would say that the 1979 Constitution, the Third Republican Constitution, was actually superior. From a constitutional design standpoint and a content standpoint, it's actually superior to this one. And yet that constitution was very short-lived. What is the difference? The political environment changed. The timing of the 1992 Constitution, this Constitution benefits from a very special timing. It came at a time, globally, in fact, when authoritarian regimes were falling. Remember, it comes in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, of apartheid in South Africa. The world was changing. Democracy was becoming the new order. So we moved along. But there were also domestic factors, right? We had hit a roadblock. We had tried coups and all of that, and development wasn't moving. The country's political development wasn't moving. We were not moving forward. So there were political factors too. And fortunate for the 1992 Constitution, for the first time, I think we were able to get a lead consensus. What do I mean by that? In 1992, even though, for example, a part of the political class refused to participate in the Consultative Assembly, right? Because they did not like the manner in which they said it had been state managed or orchestrated by the incumbent regime. They nonetheless campaigned for the Constitution to be adopted, which means they were committed to the transition, nonetheless. Even after 1992 elections, presidential elections, the NPP cried foul and boycotted the parliamentary elections, but they stayed in the game, continued to stay in the game. They went to court many times, which means they were willing to work within the framework. So the divisions, even though there were still political class divisions, there was consensus within both sides that this is a constitution that we are going to use to run this country. That kind of consensus had not emerged for a long time in our history. We had not gotten our political class to agree that the 60 Constitution was the one we're going to use, 69 was the one we're going to use. So finally, we got to a point where there was a confluence of factors favorable to this Constitution. And as citizens, we had lived under many, many different regimes. We had become exhausted. There was a certain fatigue with military regime, which in 1979 was not there. Remember, in 1979, June 4th comes, very popular, a lot of people let the blood flow. And so there was a certain signaling from the public that the military were still welcome. So 1981 happens. But this time around, people really were fatigued and wanted to move on. And so there are a number of things have happened. And then, of course, when the time came for the term limits provision to be tested the first time, Jerry John Rawlings is the leader. If Jerry sticks to term limits, then he stays. Right? Because for most people, he was thought to be the greatest danger to the term limit provision. Jerry sticks to the term limit provision, his successor loses power, they go. So the consensus has held. This is what explains the longevity of the 1992 Constitution. It is the political environment and the politics, not so much the Constitution itself as a document. There is a lot of flaw in the document, a lot that is not great, right? No Constitution is perfect. There are a lot of flaws, but I think that we should be careful not to suggest that because the Constitution has gone on uninterrupted for 30 years, others were abolished or overthrown within 5, 2, 3 years, or even less, that somehow this should be celebrated as the best constitution and the others should be considered inferior. I think we should make that point very clear.
Okay, so why should we be amending? How should we be reforming it? We'll come to that. Now, Clara, how has this constitution fared for you?
When it comes to our constitution, it hasn't fared too badly. There are a lot of improvements that we need to make. And why do I say it hasn't fared too badly? To begin with, it is the longest constitution that we have. It's kept us together for 30 years. So that is something. It's guaranteed our democracy for 30 years, and that is something. Secondly, if you talk about political inclusion, we have largely attained that under the Constitution. I have traveled all the 16 regions of our country. I've been to some of the remotest parts of our beautiful country. One thing I like is that you realize Ghana is a very beautiful country. But what did I also find? We like to bash the MPP and the NDC for a lot of things and for good reason. But what I also found was that even in the remotest parts of the country, you will find some paraphernalia of sort of these two parties. That is political inclusion, which is key for democracy. So you can tell that throughout the length and breadth of the country, we can say that there is political inclusion. It's just that the two big parties need a lot more to do, but we can give them credit for the political inclusion. Where we have not fared too well is economic inclusion. We still have not been able to secure for ourselves the economic prosperity that we hoped that the country and the constitution could help to guarantee for us. So we have a lot to do when it comes to economic inclusion. So there we haven't fared very well when it comes to economic inclusion, but we haven't fared too badly. I think we have reason to be proud of ourselves for how far we have come, but we must also be humble and bold enough to admit that there is more work to do and then to see how we need to have that work done. That is why we need to come back and take another look at our constitution, see where we have fared well, where we have not fared so well, and what we can do to improve our chances going forward.
So that if my grandmother, who is in the village, who doesn't understand a lot of the things going on, asked you the question, give me 3 reasons why this constitution has done well, what would you tell her? What is it that she has benefited from the constitution as a citizen?
The main thing I will cite is peace. At least it's guaranteed our peace for all this while. That is something. And once we have an atmosphere of peace, there is something that we can do with that. The second thing I would mention is that at least we have a chance to vote for our leadership. So we know that every 4 years for political leadership, she has a right to be registered and to vote, so that when it comes to voting, she has a right to vote. The Constitution also guarantees certain human rights for her, so that she has a right to take action to enforce those rights. Those are some of the rights that she has benefited under the Constitution. But that is not all. There is so much more that the Constitution can guarantee her. And it is for that reason we need to keep working and growing as a people.
Unfortunately, she equates the voting to chaos and doesn't want me getting close to the ballot box. Tells me, stay away, stay out of trouble. All right. Okay.
I see.
At the political science department at the premier university, if you were dealing with your students and they ask, why is this constitution good after 3 decades, what will be the positives?
Thank you, Samson. If you go back to political philosophy, as far back as 1700, the German political philosopher Immanuel Kant talks about how to achieve internal peace and to build a long republic. And he mentioned 3 important interrelated variables: liberalism, the guaranteeing of the civil liberties and rights of every citizen in a state; constitutionalism, the provision of the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law and equality of rights; and then a representative rule, a government that is owned by the people and in which the people can participate in decision-making process. These 3 things, the tripod of Kant, actually provides the foundation for peaceful coexistence of different groups of people and for the triumph of every democratic society. And if you look at the 1992 Constitution, it has an element of all these tripod. The Bill of Rights, or guarantee of civil liberties, equality before the law and the rule of law, and then guaranteeing the people as a transitional process from the PNDC regime to a 1992 democratic dispensation. These 3 things alone is enough to guarantee that element of stability.
You have heard it
But-
said,
but-
na constitution we go chop.
But I'm coming. I'm going to add something to it, Samson. The other bit, besides this, is 2 other important factors I want to add. I've already emphasized environment. And Prof mentioned the whole context of the liberal triumphalism after the end of the Cold War, and the whole concept of the 3rd wave of democratization. So democracy now became the rule of the game. You either accept it or you risk being left out. But the other idea has to do with the fact that there were development of institutions and punitive measures to punish countries that overthrew their constitutions, i.e. the ECOWAS can blacklist you, they can sanction you, the UN, development partners. All these things make it now unattractive to be able to set aside the constitution, even in circumstances that democracy is now backsliding. If you look at the global data, VDEM and all those, they tell you that the number of countries that were democratic then are no longer in democracy because, like Prof mentioned, demand is outstripping supply. So people are now looking for alternative means of development, government that will offer them economic development. But even that notwithstanding, if it was just about the whole concept of democratic acceptability and liberal triumphalism, then democratic backsliding should have opportunity for people to want to put democracy aside. And that coming the second point, political culture. The political culture of Ghanaians since 1992 has evolved to the extent that even in the way we vote, we still see the element of monetization and all those things. But what every politician who has contested election, either at the primaries level or the national level, will tell you that the Ghanaian delegate or voter is no longer the same. Increasing sophistication and rationalization. Our political culture has developed to the extent that we have now internalized democratic norms and agree that the only game in town is democracy, even where we don't like it. So when people say that, oh, the economic rankings of the country has gone down, political rankings, human rights, development is not coming, it's hard. People can't afford, they will still say that, wait till 2024. So the idea is that no matter what happens, we should still use the democratic means. I think, by and large, the development of our political culture over 30 years of practice under this constitution has actually strengthened our democratic resolve. And to go by that particular democratic way of doing things, even where we disagree or we don't like it.
Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists. If you are joining us virtually or watching us on the television or listening on radio, this is the 2022 annual Constitution Week lecture and panel discussion by the NCCE, and it's on the theme 3 decades of uninterrupted constitutional rule, revisiting the agenda for reforms. And I have been engaging Dr. Alidu Seidu of the University of Ghana Political Science Department, Clara Berry Kaseti, private legal practitioner, also teaches the law at the University of Ghana School of Law, and Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh of the CDD. Now, let's come to what needs to change and how. In 2010, we set up the Constitution Review Commission, eminent panel, including His Lordship Justice Puaman here. And they produced that 1,000-page document, gave us recommendations that came from us across the country. All former presidents contributed, the judges, at every sector. Everybody seems to have made some contribution. And the value, we are told, was $6.3 million. So that's how much we spent on that program. And yet, it's gathering dust because of certain disagreements. Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, what needs looking at and how?
So a constitution is sometimes referred to as defining the rules of the game. Right? And for every game, you have 2 kinds of rules. Right? The rules of entry and exit, how we select the players of the game and how we deselect them. And then the rules of play, once you have selected them, how the game will be played, whether it's dummy or it's Owari or Monopoly or whatever. Right? I think our constitution has been great, excellent, on the rules of entry and exit, but not so great when it comes to the rules of play. What do I mean by that? So when we set out to do this constitution, the constitution is a problem-solving document, right? So we seek to use the constitution to solve certain pressing problems at the time. At the time, what were the most pressing problems? We wanted to do away with the exclusion of citizens from participation in the selection of their government. We wanted to say no to military rule and to impose monopoly of power by a particular group. We wanted term limits. We didn't want one person to stay in the executive office in Jubilee House forever. And we wanted an orderly process for changing government if we wanted to. Those rules of entry and exit, in my view, were the key things that animated our transition to democracy in 1992. And as to those things, I think our constitution has done very well. We have had orderly transition through the ballot box. We have done away with imposed monopoly of power. We have restored, to some extent, civilian control of the military. The military has been confined to the barracks. We've done all of those things. The problem, what is left, in my view, are the rules of play, which is once you are selected and you are seated at the table to play the game, how do we play the game? How do we use power? How are the players going to play the game of politics, of democracy? I think when you judge the Constitution by that score, we haven't done too well. One way in which we haven't done well is that the Constitution, as all constitutions do, does donate considerable power to government to rule the country. Every government needs to be empowered. But good constitutions also go, once they've given you power, they also constrain you because they know human nature. Good constitutions know human nature, that if you give a group, even if they are term limited, if you give them too much power, without constraint, they could use it for other things. I think our constitution's framework for checks and balances are extremely weak. Extremely weak. So that we haven't done well on that score. I also think a major deficit is in local democracy. We tout ourselves among the leading democracies in Africa, and that is true, and especially in the region. But you would notice that that is true if we confine democracy to selecting national office holders. When it comes to local office holders, especially local mayors, what is called local mayors in other countries, Ghana is one of the few, not one of the few, but it's among the democracies in Africa that continues to follow the old colonial model of the governor choosing the district commissioner. We still don't elect our mayors. Essentially, it was a certain paternalism on the part of the colonial authorities that these natives in these local communities, these villages, they didn't have what it took to select their own executive authority. We know better from Accra. We, the governor, we have to pick it for them. And that has persisted. I think that is definitely a major deficit of this current constitution. So, in at least those two ways, there are other aspects I would say our constitution has also, even though we've talked about participation, I think our constitution has encouraged us to delegate too much power and not participate actively ourselves. Why do I say that? So even with constitutional reform, we have to rely on the benevolence and good graces of the political class as gatekeepers of constitutional reform for them to change the constitution if they want to. We don't have what in other countries is called the citizen initiative. In other places, notably Kenya, you can gather a number of signatures from ordinary citizens and initiate a constitutional review process, a constitutional amendment process. After all, the Constitution's ultimate beneficiaries are the citizens. Right. And in Ghana, on the other hand, we have to go to our elected representatives who are the gatekeepers of constitutional amendment. If they don't want to do it, it won't happen. As Justice Puaman said, some of the provisions that we need changed are simply unentrenched. Parliament, with a supermajority, can change them, but we are still begging to elect our mayors. Right? So in that respect, when it comes to the rules of play, how power is exercised once you access it, we haven't done well. The Constitution, I can go on, winner takes all, on and on and on. Okay. But rules of entry and exit, we've done perfect.
All right. And don't forget that I'll come to you shortly to ask questions and make your contributions. I have a number of follow-ups, but I need to cut them or shelve them so that we can proceed. Just 2 weeks ago, Ms. Kathleen Ade, the NCCE acting chairperson, was moderating one such discussion on governance. I think it was a CDD-powered program, and I followed it virtually. I discovered how the idea of the democracy that is hijacked was being expressed by the political parties. So if you go the Kenyan way, where citizens can initiate an amendment, all we need as a political party is to use our people to initiate an amendment that has a parochial, interest to us. I don't know about that, but Clara, the question is, what needs amending from where you sit, and how do we go about it? We have spent $6.3 million, and we haven't moved.
What needs amending? Now, let me wear my practitioner's hat. Now, part of the work that I do includes advising or doing due diligence to find out why, let's say, I'm coming to the civil service, the public service, or state institutions that are even set up for profit, of studying, analyzing the institution, going through their practices, their documents to find out why they are not functioning. I've done that both in country and outside country within the African continent. One point that is usually overlooked is how the political class contributes to those institutions not being effective. And I'll cite an example. You'll find out that the reason why a major entities that is set up by the state to make profit, for example, which is in a very viable position, the reason it's not making profit is because the person who is appointed, let's say the CEO, who has the knowledge and the experience and can actually do the work, but somehow has their hands tied because they are afraid of losing their job. So there is sometimes that you find somebody who is either middle level or low level who would have done something wrong that affects the profits of the entity, and if that CEO touches that employee in terms of institutional disciplinary measures, they will probably lose their job.
True.
Or there are sometimes that they have actually tried and they either get removed and another person replaced, and immediately that employee is called back. So what does that translate into? They are not able to get the best from their employees because they cannot use the disciplinary system set up within the institution to deal with the problem. It also means that some of the employees can actually be there and just impede the work of the institution and nothing will be done. So we need to take another look at the role of the political class in such kinds of institutions. We probably need to start looking at how we can separate our politics from our profits as a nation, so that we come back to looking at, we need to take another look at Article 195 and 70 of the Constitution. It's interesting that if you actually look at Article 195,
that's the appointing power of the president.
That's the appointing power of the president. It makes the president, if he wants to, will have a hand in every public office. Because
the suggestion is that he appoints some 4,000, 6,000
exactly.
people all by himself.
Exactly. That virtually anybody who has to serve in a public office. Even though Article 1952 provides for the president to delegate that power to certain segments of people, it is not very clear how often that is done. And if that is done, how effective has that been? We probably need research to look at how often that has been used and see whether the entities have been allowed to run and compare that with where the situation has not been. So I think we need to get to the level where we separate state institutions from our politics so that we know that we are working here just because we are all citizens. We have a time where we do our politics, but this is when we are all in for our country and for our nation, and we have to develop, we have to grow in that line or risk losing it. There are several other Ghanaians who can always do the job. So this is one aspect of our constitution that I would like us to take another look at, and also local government, and not just electing merely, but looking comprehensively at the provisions affecting local government, so that when we are making amendments, they are amendments that will be meaningful and throughout, and let the local government have the kind of space and power that we have to. Just to mention a few, I don't like to go for too many things at the same time, because right. I think sometimes we amend some, we study, we learn lessons, and then we keep improving as we go along.
On the economic, forward march growth that you are very much concerned about, when you mentioned the example in the village about political inclusion, you came to the point that economic inclusion is the problem. For example, the Constitution Review Commission gathered that Ghanaians overwhelmingly want to tie our politicians to a developmental path document which is binding, so that the national development planning process You come to meet a document. We need 1,000 schools. We have built 800. We are left with 200. Your job is to deliver that. Not come and promise us another 1,000 schools and build us 1,000 schools that the rains will come and wash away. They are not necessary. They are put in the bush. Nobody is there to attend them. We need, say, 1,000 hospitals. We have built 900. We need 100 more. If there is anything to be done, it should be equipping the hospitals to do the miracles we have just heard this week that has been done. You know, a brain surgery that's been done so successfully in the country. Instead of another government coming and say, I will do 100 more hospitals. Scattered around, no doctor, no nurse, no equipment. The doctors in America sometimes are not better than the doctors here, but it's the equipment. So, what do you say about that? Is that an important part of the amendment or reform process? To bind all governments to one developmental document?
That one has its positives and negatives. And in a continuing changing world, I think the negatives outweigh the positives. Let's just look at COVID. Nobody saw COVID coming. And COVID destabilized a lot of things and the traditional ways that we do things. So that when we had COVID, for example, during that time, what we needed wasn't physical blocks. What we needed was more technology, because then in our case, we had Zoom lectures, for example. So that at that time, the development needed at that time was not as much a physical space as it was in good internet connectivity. So the danger of tying people down to a particular document is that the times might change, and maybe the things we thought was what we wanted to do today may have changed. So there is that hitch there. The other thing is, what has become also part of our politics is that we vote for political parties based on their manifestos. So political parties come and tell us what they want to do, and depending on whether we agree with them or we don't agree with them, we vote or we do not vote for them, which I think is not a bad thing.
What informed that suggestion a lot more was, for example, Kufuor built us affordable homes. The NDC came, forgot about it, and started its own. That's our money. And those places were going waste. The NDC government came, built some. A new government comes in, not particularly interested. Some of them there are problems with. You may fight them in court. But whilst you are fighting, should they rot? Sagliment is an example.
That is a correct, that is a very important issue. But the problem there has more to do with accountability and how we manage it, rather than just that act alone. The problem, I think, it has to do more with accountability. Now, even if you have to continue the project, so let's say that you finish and you continue the project, it's supposed to be affordable housing, but you finish the houses and only the political elite get it. You have finished the housing, all right, but it's only the political elite who get it. Have we achieved the purpose of the affordable housing? So I think it's not bad to let political parties run on their manifestos, as long as the accountability mechanisms are important, and as long as we, the people, are also willing to hold ourselves and our leaders accountable. Okay. We can't always fold our arms and be waiting for some savior or some angel. There are no saviors and there are no angels. Every country determines its growth by its people. So our saviors and our angels are you and I. We can no longer sit and fold our arms and be looking somewhere for some savior from somewhere or some angel. We are not going to find that. And history has proven that that has usually not worked if you follow history throughout. So we need to, all of us, be responsible and accountable and willing to hold ourselves accountable as well.
Finally, Dr. Alidu Seidu, that quotation that I have gone to over and again now says that the Constitution, embodies the will of the people. It mirrors our history. And our search for progress, it contains our aspirations and our hopes for a better and fuller life. if the agreement and consensus is that this constitution has largely not achieved that after 30 years, and that there's a need for some tweaking, what needs change and how?
Thank you so much, Samson. I want to look at it from 3 perspectives, and I think my co-panelists have already spoken to them in different ways. Not complete change, but do we assert 3 things? 1, checks and balances. 2, accountability. And 3, privileging social and economic rights, just as we do to civil and political rights.
Please explain this.
Okay, I'll take that one first. Most of the defenders of the Constitution and what most civilians call for and what they always see being breached is their political and civil rights. And people are very passionate about it. Freedom of speech, freedom to participate, freedom to vote and be voted for, and all those things. And when they are breached, when a journalist is slapped or a citizen is arrested without, in a weekend, and he's held more than 24 hours, you see all the hullabaloo. But how about uplifting the very poor people in our society out of poverty and empowering them to be able to participate decently in democratic development? We usually don't see those things as quite important, the way we see and enforce and fight and defend for political and civil rights. So I think one of the ways we can reignite it is just what you were talking about. We need to reassess or redefine the role of the National Development Planning Commission. And I think we need to mainstream political party manifestos to the National Development Planning Commission in planning of development. We shouldn't let them work parallel. After all, the National Development Planning Commission was provided for in the Constitution for a purpose, and recognizing the essence of egalitarian democracy and then privileging both social and economic rights, just as we do for political and civil rights. An institution like that was seen to be necessary. And I don't think development priorities must just come largely from MMDA's short, medium, long-term plans. Political parties must be made part of the National Development Planning Commission, and their plans and manifestos must be mainstreamed into a national development agenda superheaded by the National Development Planning Commission. It may look complex, it may look, yes, every development experiment has merits and demerits. And I think what political parties, after being mainstreamed into the development planning, should do largely is to speak to their method and procedure of implementing and already agreed goals by the National Development Planning Commission. If you look at the NDC and the MPP and almost all the political parties in this country, their manifesto come from what? Speaking to the general population and finding out what their challenges, needs, aspirations are. And that is why sometimes, regardless of the difference in ideology between, say, the NDC and the MPP, you tend to see them having policies that are very similar, simply because they are all speaking to the needs of the people. So why can't we have the National Development Planning Commission mainstreaming all these needs and working in tandem with political parties to fashion out a development policy that political parties only speak to the procedure of implementation. And then citizens will now decide that this particular political party have a better plan of implementing these policies than this other party and voting for it. So I want to see that thing coming out strongly in a maybe possible amended constitution. The second one has to do with accountability and checks and balances. I'll take it together. And I think this speaks largely to what Clara has already talking about, the president's power of appointment. And I think that particular power has to some extent hit the balance of power between the 3 co-equal organs of government, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. And you've already mentioned that the president made a lot of appointments directly. And even where the president doesn't do a direct appointment, he has a lot of influence in the indirect appointments. So, for example, the Chief Justice, the Auditor General, the bosses of Shiraj, Electoral Commission, NCCE, and all those institutions, they are the 4th estate of accountability institutions in the state. If they are appointed, even the IGP, the chief of defense staff, and other security heads. If they are appointed, if they design a mechanism of appointing their own, maybe just like the way Parliament appoints their speakers, there's a tendency that these people can exercise their duty without a second thought that the appointing authority may not be happy with what I do. If they appoint their own people in a well-designed, structured way, it gives them the power to be able to exercise their duty without fear or favor. Even the Speaker of Parliament, we know that the President doesn't appoint the Speaker directly, but the presidency have a way of influencing who is appointed and who is not appointed, even though the ultimate decision rests with the MPs. And that particular power of appointment, especially where the Constitution says, I don't know exactly which part of the specific provision, but it says 2/3 of our ministers must come from the legislature. 2/3 of our ministers of state must be appointed from the legislature. And that also affects...
More than half.
Sorry, more than half, not 2/3. Must come from the legislature. And that also undermines the balance. Because if I'm a minister or a deputy minister, I now fall part of the collective responsibility and accountability of the executive. So how do I hold the executive to account when that accountability affects me? So by and large, it affects balance of power, but it also has level of accountability. Shiraj can investigate maybe the president if it's brought before, a petition is brought before him. The Auditor General audit government business and all those institutions. How will they be able to have free of conscience and not look their back if they think that the appointing authority may have the power or find a way to remove me from office or transfer me from where I'm working to another place? So I think we need to find a way to reassert. And practicing with the 1990 democracy with the 1992 Constitution for 30 years has actually exposed...
Is it not important that the president appoint these people, but they don't answer to him? President appoints the Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court or the Superior Court. They don't answer to him, and he can't do them like they say, FOCO. So what's the problem? He appoints the Auditor General. Okay, he appoints the chairperson for NCCE and the deputies, for Shraj, for Electoral Commission. But he doesn't have the power to remove them.
So some say, yeah, it's a good idea, but the idea is that if I'm the appointing authority, I wouldn't even appoint somebody who would do something for me to even remove him in the first place. There may be code of ethics, merit, experience, standing in position, all those things. But we know in most cases, some of these things are thrown to the dogs when appointments are being made.
Like Clara said, is it not about the quality of the people? If I am appointed and I know that the president has performed a perfunctory function, the Constitution says you must appoint me. That's why he's appointing me. He's not appointing me because he likes me or he doesn't like me, but because the Constitution says he has to do it. And he does it, and he can't remove me. Why should I behold to him when he can't remove me?
So, Samson, this is my point. If we do not make the president appoint at all, and those institutions have a way of electing or appointing, that is good. Because, for example, as there are qualities, maybe experience, good record standing, all those things. And I know there are a lot of instances where the president or the appointing authority may overlook these things and appoint somebody who will be overly favorable to him. So in that case, you won't even act in ways that will require me to remove you. So why not if he doesn't appoint at all?
Back to Clara's issue, and where Professor Kwesi Prempeh speaks about you can't vote and go sit and sleep, wait for the next elections. If you have been appointed to head Shraj and you are incompetent, we the citizens have a duty to remove you.
But over the 30 years we have...
I led the petition that removed the Shraj boss, Loretta Lamte.
Yes.
It was one individual, Richard Nyama, who got up and said, you are wasting our money, you are not working. You must get out of that office. He triggered the petition process, and she was gone.
Yes, I agree there should be some level of claims where rights and responsibilities and the constitutions are not respected. But maybe that may just be one of the several lucky cases.
So is it the people or is the Constitution? That's my question.
So I think it's both. It's both. It's both the people and the Constitution. But it is not also a bad idea that we just don't allow the president to appoint somebody who will favor him, and you now require the people to get up and fight their own battle.
Okay.
So we need to balance it.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for our panelists. Please, if you have a question or a contribution, so that the television cameras can capture you without struggle and obstruction, we will plead with you to come forward here. If we can take a cue this way. Yes, please. Give first to the Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Yes.
Thank you very much. NCCE, well, you're very notorious for Constitutional Week ever since you were set up. But I was hoping that beyond that, your officers in the district and the constituencies would at least walk in the market and explain what governance is about. I know you complain that you don't have money, but for earning their emoluments, let them, at least their district officers, walk in the communities and explain what governance, what the constitution requirements are about. But the main speaker, Sir Scott, that's what we called him.
Yes, Scott.
Justice Puamang has left. In his speech, he identified 3 critical things, which he says they picked up in the interactions with the Ghanaian populace. And for me, that is the crux of the matter. First one is deficit in transparency. They say public office. I think it's not just public office. In our entire society, just stop by the roadside and see a basket of potatoes or a basket of mangoes. It is organized as if there's something in the basket itself. No, they have paper to the brim, and what they are selling to you as a basket full is only what is you're seeing at the top. That is our life. That's our style. That's us. You go to the hospital. You're in a queue. Somebody comes and he has a way of getting money and jump in the queue. It is not a doctor. It is not a politician. It is the everyday person who is taking advantage of the position he has in order to cheat those who are not willing or don't have the capacity. So for me, the biggest challenge we have as a country is our integrity deficit. I have seen that public sector corruption. Yes, it is huge. Unfortunately, we discuss public sector corruption with regards to politicians. But for those who watch keenly, look at all the Public Account Committee's reports. How many of them involve political office holders? How many of the infractions?
Some headmaster, some matron, else somewhere.
The accounting officer, the agency. For about 90% of the infractions are the everyday people we say are the victims. Indeed, they are as much guilty as those of us who call politicians. So I think our discussion of the real challenges we have, in my view, there's a non-realization of development. If we're able to deal with the first and second, we will realize a lot more benefit from the public expenditure we make. And so I ask the question, if we amend the Constitution, any part of it, would that bring transparency on its own? Okay. If we amended any part of the Constitution, would that make the everyday person honest?
Thank you.
For me, that's the critical question. And my suggestion is, we are focusing too much on documents and individuals and categorizing politicians. No, we should deal with the culture of the people. We are dishonest as a people. That's my observation. Unfortunately, I've been in public service for the past 20 years, right from DVLA through. When I was in private legal practice, my focus was on judges. Then I came to public service, and I realized that even when you discussed the judges, for a large amount of the issues we complained about, the suggested or alleged corruption did not get to the judges. their court clerks and things take money in the name of the judges. For those who are experienced, they follow the proceedings and they can tell who will win. And they will approach the person. So, oh, if you give me this amount of money, I'll give it to the judge and we'll win. They'll take the money that the judge doesn't get to know. Indeed, there was a particular case in the Kumasi Ashtown Court. After the ruling, the person was making noise. You have taken my money, you have ruled against me. The judge will lift his head, and you see the person walking around. Hey, madam, why are you still here? Your case has been faced, and you took money from me, and you have ruled against me. And so he said, who took money from you? He said, this your clerk came to me and said that if I give you money for you, you will win. When we went into the investigation, actually, the clerk perceived that that person will win. The judge concluded otherwise, but he took the money in the name of the judge, but it didn't get to the judge. So often, our focus is on people in the top, heads of agencies. That should not be the end of the matter. We, in my view, probably we should start from the basics,
All right.
the nurseries, and start telling people, build new values. That's why I agree entirely with Madam
Clara.
Clara. The democracies we adore elsewhere are practiced within a certain culture, a certain practice, a certain ethics, which we don't have often. I'm saying that, frankly, all of us, now I'm an old man, I can classify myself, I've turned 60 already. What values were we trained with? Right from primary school. What values? What were we trained with? What I know is what I learned from my home. It may be different from what you learned from your home and what Nana learned from his home. So what can we call national values in this country?
All right.
When I was in primary school, there was something we called National Chapter, was it? Charter of Redemption. Those things, we recited them, but nobody is reciting or talking about them today. So I would suggest that governance, what is it? How do people understand governance? The expectations. Do people know how the roads are constructed? Who pays for them and how we pay for them? Everybody says my constituency or my community must get the road. Yes, you deserve it. But are we generating enough money to cover everywhere? Where is the money coming from? Are we getting enough? How many people actually read the budget and understand that even with the e-levy, if we got all we budgeted for, we will still borrow about 7% of GDP. Even we've got all the 6 billion or so we budgeted for, to be able to meet all the things we put in the budget that we will do in the 2022 year, we will still borrow 6 or 7% of our GDP.
All right.
So when we are discussing borrowing and that when I come to us politicians, with the assistance of you media people, you can assist the Ghanaian people by being truthful about what the things they ask for, about telling them where the resources will come from.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. The first Deputy Speaker of Parliament, please introduce yourself briefly and be brief as much as possible.
Thank you very much. I'm Isaac Esidiode from the Ghana Education Service headquarters. My question to the panelists takes inspiration from that seminar statement by Justice Sowa in Tufo Attorney General that Constitution mirrors the inspirations of the people. So when I go to Article 11.2 and you look at rules of customary law, I want to find out from them what has been the assessment of rules of customary law in terms of lawmaking and adjudication in our courts in this country since we began practicing the 1992 Constitution. Because aside the rules of doctrines and the common law, which are also values of some other people in elsewhere, what have been Ghanaian jurisprudence or African jurisprudence in terms of rules of customary law in our case?
Thank you very much. Okay, so there are lawyers here. They will help you. The Constitution has mandated the National House of Chiefs and by that regard, the Regional House of Chiefs to, as it were, assemble the customs. I don't know how far we have gone with that, 30 years on. Yes, please.
I'm Dr. Samuel Nkumban, and I'm also a lecturer at the University of Ghana, UTAG president, precisely. A couple of concerns, and then I would want to pick the thoughts of our able panelists on some of those concerns. One is that the Constitutional Review Commission's report and recommendations is 11 years old. I'm wondering whether or not 11 years is not sufficient time enough for us to have been considering changes that have happened within our country for another review. And in any case, we've already spent, as the moderator indicated, well over $6 million to do the 11-year-old report, which nothing has been done about as yet. That is one of the concerns. The second, I would want to agree with Dr. Alidu as regards the need for a national development plan.
Please, the first concern, you want the document, as was done, to be looked at, or a fresh one?
I'm wondering whether or not, after 11 years, we do not need...
It is still relevant.
Whether those recommendations will still be relevant, or there wouldn't be the need for some other considerations.
Okay.
The second is to agree with the need for a national development plan. And you would agree that Malaysia simply implemented our 7-year development plan, and we are going back to them to borrow. And I know we have tried to roll out several development plans that we have not been able to do anything about. Shouldn't we be able to tie political parties to feeding their manifestos into how they intend to implement a national development plan that gives us what we want?
All right.
In the case of Madam Clara's concern regarding COVID and that is the reason for which every nation must have some reserves and should make provision for emergencies. That has to happen.
Okay.
And with the Constitution as a living document, and as a scientist who teaches something concerning evolution, I think that it is long overdue that our Constitution has yet to see some revision after 30 years. And that several factors come into play, the environment, the needs of the people, and all of that come into play in determining what has to happen within a certain time frame. And I think that it is long overdue that our Constitution needs evolution, and that has to happen, and happen quickly, for us to be able to. Of course, the last bit has to do with the issue of attitudinal change, which is required for, as the Deputy Speaker alluded to. And I think that there is a need for that educational evolution also from the basic level, where we were singing patriotic songs. I don't see that happen anymore. And I think that those are some of the things that are contributing to our value systems that are not auguring well for the development of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nkumban.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let's hear you. Your name?
Yes, my name is Edward Otimpong.
Your name is?
Edward Otimpong from the Public Services Commission.
Okay.
Okay. So the second deputy speaker spoke about dishonesty and made us understand that it's something that he feels cut across board nationwide, or is pervasive. Well, I personally agree with that also. And so does our former president, distinguished former president, President Kufuor, also said once that corruption even started from Adam. So who am I to disagree? But the point I want to make is that that's why, particularly for public service office holders, that's why we should have checks and balances. I think that, as has been said here and in other platforms, there are a lot of laws, punitive measures, sanctions, and so on that are available. Institutions that are supposed to help us with checks and balances, such as Special Prosecutor's Office and so on. Now, he also made mention of the work of the Auditor General. If we were to go back probably 10 years and pile up the number of infractions that can be quantified into money terms, probably we'll be running into millions or billions of dollars or Ghana cedis. The question now is that, in all of this, how is accountability playing out? the special prosecutor, and then the other institutions that are supposed to pick the infractions, for instance, from the Auditor General's report. What are they doing about it? And then we have a lot of monies, that people are sitting on, or that have gone into the drain, or sometimes in people's pockets. And we keep complaining that we don't have money in the country. He made mention of loans also. Then we go back to countries that probably should be taking loans from us now, and then we are borrowing from them. It's a disgrace. And I think it's high time our leaders stop really talking, as much as to say, and then, walk their talk. Very, very important.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Next person.
Can I make the last
Next
one?
person contribution. Okay, we have too many people behind you.
Okay, so the last one is, I was looking at Article 66 of the Constitution. Now, I was talking about 4 years mandate for a president. Of course, then after 4 years, when you are given second mandate, you can go. But we are looking at 4 years. And I thought that probably the framers of the Constitution perhaps may have considered countries like the US, where they use 4 years. But monkeys play by sizes. The US is long gone in terms of development. And so probably we should also consider extending the mandate to probably 6 years. So that the first year, empirical evidence shows that most governments, new government, almost waste the first year making appointments and all that. You yourself said something about 4,000 appointments and all that. So that the last 5 years can be spent on the
Let's take the next person. Thank you very much. Edward Otimpong.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Godwin Isidro with
Yes.
Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay, Godwin, make it very snappy.
A student of law, yes, I'll make it snappy. Okay, so in '96, we amended the Constitution, Article 8, to include, to give Ghanaians dual citizenship. And for some time now, we've been having issues with some of our compatriots wanting to become members of parliament. And as we are aware, we have a lot of them with skills and knowledge to contribute to the development of our nation. And so most of them want to come back and also be a part of our politics. So I want to find out from the panel if they feel it's time for us to really look at amending the amended Article 8 and then also the Citizenship Act in order to include people with dual citizenship in occupying certain positions in the country without they having to be saddled with court cases here and there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Removing the restrictions on dual citizens.
Thank you. My name is S.U. Besam Philemon, Ghana Prison Service.
Sorry, the name again?
Besam Philemon, Bechantu, Ghana Prison
Philemon.
Service. Yes, please.
Thank you.
My question is, our panelists made mention that government, in consultation with other institutions or other body, appoint the heads of states, especially other institutions, the SHRA, the NCCE, and others. So my question is, why is it that when we have a change of government, you realize that a new government will come and change all those heads? So if it's not for maybe 1 or 2 reasons, why don't they allow them to function until maybe their retirement or their time elapses before they change them? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Alhassan Rafiatu Ajike from Ghana Lebanon Islamic School. And
Please, the name again.
Alhassan Rafiatu Ajike.
Rafiatu,
Yeah.
okay.
So what I want to say is that, as Congressman John Lewis said, our democracy is not a state, but an act. So what he meant by this is that our democracy is as strong as our willingness and the zeal we put in to fight for it. So about 3 decades ago, society was in the ghetto and wide open to technological advancement as we have it today. The availability of various media platforms to disseminate political information widely, unlike 3 decades ago. So, like example is that the younger ones today are able to have easy access to politics information through the manifestos, advertisements, and the political regalias like everywhere. So they're even also able to contribute to policies and stuff through the social medias, maybe the hashtags and the stuff, sorry. So what I'm wondering is that hasn't it taken too long a time to reduce the voting age, to widen political inclusion in making decision making in the country. And this is also going to strengthen our democracy because we, the young ones now, even as assisting, we are idealistic and knows what's right or wrong. So if we are given the opportunity to vote too, we would also have a say and be able to make change.
Thank you very much. Reducing the voting age. And that will be our last contributor or questioner. Please, let's hear you.
My name is Abraham Pabru Sam. I work with the Economic and Organized Crime Office. I have 2 submissions to make. I think that largely the clamor for constitutional amendment is good. But I am of the view that if you go through the entire Constitution, beautiful document, you find out that all the principles of constitutional law are in our Constitution. I think our biggest problem is how we have implemented that Constitution. If you look at all our laws in Ghana, you can see that each time we are in a haste to bring more laws. But have we asked ourselves...
Okay, we have one more person joining to contribute, and that will be the very last. I will not be able to take any more contributions from the floor here. Thank you.
But have we asked ourselves, are we implementing the laws that we have? For instance, if you talk about the appointment of the Chief Justice, it is with input from the Council of State, and its removal under Article 146 is very stringent. An example was given as to how the Shrine Board was moved by one person. So my problem is not about removing a wholesale change of the Constitution, even though I agree that some portions of our Constitution need to be amended. But have we done any assessment to see how well over the 30 years have the various governments, the various presidents that we have, respected the provisions of the Constitution? How well has Parliament implemented the provisions of Parliament? How well has the judiciary done their work in enforcing the Constitution? That is what I think we should look at first before even we discuss amendment.
Okay.
And I think the second point I want to make is that, I think there are 3 epochs in every country's history. The first is they want self-rule, which we had through Kwame Nkrumah. Then they want stability, which we had through President Rawlings, because our coups have stopped. Now what we want is economic development. And I think economic development can only happen when we make local government the central brain of our economic development. If I say I stay in Mataiko, if Mataiko electoral area has a head who has a budget, and he finds creative ways of finding money for Mataiko, maybe he will belong to a larger, maybe the 3 closest, Bubuashi.
Please, I have announced that I'm not taking any further questions, so if you are coming in the queue, please don't.
Maybe Bubuashi, Atiko, and the 3 will belong to a larger body, then we all belong to the AMA, which belong to the regional body and national body. And it is independent of itself. That we don't depend only on the consolidated fund for money.
Right.
We find creative means.
Thank
I
you,
think
Abraham.
local government should be done.
Thank
and
you,
the way
Abraham.
out is by electing our leaders. That's
Thank you,
why whether
Abraham.
it's through politics
Thank you
or
very
without
much.
politics, that
Thank
will
you
be the
very
way
much.
out.
Thank you. Right. Please give it to the, thank you. All right, so a number of contributions and questions. We'll go to the questions. We'll take our last question and then our contribution.
Not a question, but I'm making an observation. What catches my attention right now is the way we place emphasis on census.
Census.
Yes. If we come to accept that development hinges on human capital and no other, whenever we come out with census, the figures, I think the last time we had it was in 2021, I think. Are we fully aware of census in this country, statistical service, upon which our own development must hinge on? We need to look at that, because that is the basis of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I suppose that's the last one. Yes. Okay, I thought you stood in to pick the mic for him. Okay, quickly.
Good afternoon. I'm Numbo Kandi First, Kole Wulomo, and with me is Numbo Kofi Chiwa. We are representing Gandangme Council of Wulome. Okay, my question is, we have heard about development corruption and everything. But we, the traditional authorities, we also contribute to the development of this nation.
Certainly.
Yeah, but if you look at the Chieftaincy Act, Chapter 22 of 270, you see, we the Wulome, we are not, they have not recognized us that we are also chiefs. Yeah, so we are praying that maybe if some amendment can be made so that we can also be recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. All right, so a round of applause for our questioners and contributors. Thank you. Okay, so we have the first question from Isaac Esiedu, who is asking about the rules of customary law. Where are they? Then we have Dr. Samuel Nkumban of the UTAG, talking about the need for fresh constitutional review processes after the one that was done in 2010, because it may have lived its usefulness, and then asking whether the NDP development program can be made a bit binding sort of on political parties for purposes of their manifestos. And then Edward Otimpong, that was a contribution. Godwin Esiedu wants removal of restrictions on dual citizenship. And then Philemon, the prison service officer, is asking why appointees must leave office or hold office coterminous with the president, the Presidential Transition Act. And then Al-Hassan Rafiatu is talking about reduction in the voting age because young people are aware and are contributing. And then Nomo Kai the First wants some recognition for Wulome. I'll simply ask my guests to choose and pick and put things together so that we can finish in the next 5 minutes. So a minute each, starting with Professor H.K.C. Prempeh.
Okay, so I will pick, I think I definitely agree with the proposal to remove restrictions on dual citizens' participation in public life. I think that it's long overdue. The point has been made, development really now is about human capital. It's not about your material resources in the ground. You know, this is the new era in which we live, and everybody agrees that we have ample human resources that live outside of the shores of the country, many of whom have, for very practical reasons, obtained the citizenship of other countries in addition to being Ghanaians. That should not be a bar to office holding. I would probably just keep it at the presidency, or then that's it. Being a member of parliament, DCE, I don't think there's really any real strong rationale now for excluding dual citizens. I think I like the proposal for reducing voting age. I would keep it at the age of consent. I would probably reduce it to 16. The point made about the implementation, that before we ask about what to amend, we should ask ourselves, or do at least a diagnostic of to what extent have we enforced even the ones that are already there. I think it's a very good question. The Constitution, for example, imposes certain obligations on Parliament to enact certain laws. 30 years later, has Parliament enacted all of those laws, for example? There are also certain things that the Constitution almost says in black and white that we have departed from, right? We haven't even enforced those things. So I think it's a good assignment to give those who are advocating constitutional review to ask ourselves, so that we don't just put on more and more laws on the books for no reason, to what extent have the existing ones been obeyed, been enforced? And there are some that we have almost deleted. You know, Article 296C, for example, says that every public agency that has been given administrative discretion must publish the regulations according to which will exercise that discretion. The Supreme Court, in a case, France versus Attorney General, says, you don't have to do that. So we put it in the Constitution, we take it to the Supreme Court to enforce it in a particular case, and the court says, that's too much work. So sometimes, even judicial review can undo the things that you have done in the Constitution. So I agree. And I think the emphasis on civic duty, what I take from the first deputy speaker's point is that civic duty also matters. And indeed, I think it's a point that we don't make enough. The Constitution cannot displace civic activism. The Constitution goes hand in hand with democracy. We are a constitutional democracy. The Constitution plays a part, but it leaves day-to-day democracy to fill in the gaps. And so we cannot outsource that role, the citizens' role. And I like the point Clara made, that oftentimes we are looking for a savior. And sometimes I think in the search for a binding national development plan, we are still looking for a savior. But that job is for citizens to do, to demand, to agitate, to protest, to do those things, to do the street work that needs to be done. So I think, a number of points that have been made here, absolutely on point. On the issue of custom and culture, the point I'll make is that the Constitution does not impose a monolithic Ghanaian culture on us. It recognizes that we are a multicultural society. Every citizen, every community have the right to practice their culture within certain limits that are set by the Constitution. And sure, those cultures also evolve. Our cultures also evolve. And as you rightly said, the chieftaincy institution is recognized as the one to help us improve, codify our customary law and those other things. The point about the presidential term is an important one, really. The choice of 4 years is arbitrary. There's no reason why it should be 4. In other African countries, it is 6, it is 5. I asked one of the persons who participated in the draft of the Constitution why they chose 4. He said, well, it has always been, we are used to 4. But, Charlie, if we had one person staying in power and we are a presidential system, not a parliamentary system, the parliamentary system, if the person is not performing during their term, you can remove them by a vote of no confidence, even in the middle of their term. Here, you can't. Imagine somebody being given 6 years. And Charlie, if in the third term, no, 3 years, we don't like the person. That might even encourage a coup. That's what she told me. So we thought about it and said, Charlie, 4 there, we can live within 4. But if the person is goofing within 4, 3 years, we only have 1 more year.
So why not put a removal clause there?
Well, so that was the rationale she gave me, and I had not thought about it that way. But there are reasons why. So our history sometimes informs the fears we had at the time. That if you gave somebody 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, somebody who is not satisfied with the way government is being run might be impatient and will do a coup. Maybe we are no longer, that fear is gone, so maybe we can relook that provision.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Clara.
I think Professor Prempeh has touched on almost all of it, so I'll be very brief on a few. One is customary law. I think our law, as has rightly been noted, has already recognized customary law. That is why even in the fundamental law, which is the Constitution, customary law is provided for and is part of our law. The courts have also been implementing and enforcing customary law when the issue has come before the courts. So even the courts also uphold customary law when it comes. But I must admit that there are challenges to how customary law is implemented and can be implemented. One of them is that we are cosmopolitan largely now. People have moved from a lot of their indigenous areas. A lot of them are probably even not aware what their own customary law is. So to what extent can you hold them and in what way? Apart from that challenge, there's the issue about what is the customary law at a particular point in time, because we all admit that customary law evolves. What was customary law yesterday may evolve and change in certain ways. For example, when the issues of girl-child education came, we had to amend, in quotes, some aspects of our customary law. So there's a real difficulty of what is the customary law at a point in time. The chieftaincy institution, as has been noted, was tasked with at least determining what the customary law is at a particular point in time. But I guess the challenge there too is that what if it changes? At what point do we, when it changes, do we now come and amend it and make it look like a statute when a customary law is intended to be unlike a statute? So there are certain fine details, but that notwithstanding, our laws have recognized customary law, recognized the chieftaincy institution, and has provided for respect for same. The second thing is NDC political party manifestos. Should we have a national development plan which we all go by? I think it's a good thing to subject to a national debate, but ultimately, because we have political party manifestos and they have to campaign based on something for votes, I think we have to look at how the work of the NDPC can be tied into the work of political party manifestos, but more importantly, because our main fear here is because of accountability. Because our main fear is because of accountability, I think we need to revisit our mechanisms for accountability to see how to address that fear that has brought about this. And largely, and finally, I will touch on the issue about whether it's amendment or implementation. I think it's both. There are certain aspects of our constitution that need amendment. Look, we just talked about local government. And then Article 195, which concentrates power of appointment into public office in the hands of the president. So there are certain aspects that need amendment. But, like we keep saying, amendment alone will not solve the problem. We can draft the beautiful laws and put it down if we do not couple that with implementation. So it is good laws coupled with good implementation that would give us the result that we want. So we are as good as the implementation that we develop, we try to put in place for ourselves. So when it comes to that, I think that we need both. We have to start working at our implementation. We also need certain amendments for our people. And finally, the issue about us, I have made the point that yes, we are all involved in terms of the values. And yes, to a very large extent, like the examples that I cited, it is not the 1992 Constitution that binds our hands when it comes to our personal affairs, even in the small groups that we are. But the dishonest, it's embarrassing to admit, but largely we're very dishonest people. But how do we get out of that? It won't be by preaching and saying it is the people. I think political leadership is still relevant. The reason being that in this country, we look up a lot to our political leadership. So political leadership must model certain values. It is those values that will trigger down. I'll cite an example. There was someone that we're chatting with who had been given some small power to appoint some short-term, I think some 2 weeks or 3 weeks job to do with respect to this census. So I was asking the person how it was going, and what she said was, with the people who applied, they did some training for them, so she was trying to use the results of the training, look at the qualification, look at who did well. But their overall boss, he realized that their overall boss had brought his wife and kids and brothers and everybody, whether they were qualified or not, he was just pushing them inside. And when they complained that, but boss, we are not, this is the guidelines we are supposed to go by. But look at what you're doing. He said he cannot be bothered. They can go to wherever they want. So he was bringing his family members. You know the implication of that? They also put aside the criteria. They too started looking for family members.
Right.
And so you can see the effect of leadership. Once they saw that, this is what the leader is doing, we are all going to do the same. So it is true that you and I have a responsibility in our values. But it is also true that if we are going to see a reformation of our values, we do need the leadership to model those values so that they can trickle down. Otherwise, we are going to be talking for a very long time.
All right, thank you very much. Let's hear Dr. Alidu Seidu. If you are still with us, and thanks to the Joy News TV, City TV, and the rest of you who have giving us very good coverage, as well as the virtual streaming on the NCCE's social media handles. This is the 2022 Annual Constitution Week lecture and panel discussion by the NCCE on the theme 3 Decades of Uninterrupted Constitutional Rule, Revisiting the Agenda for reform. Yes, Dr. Ali Dusedu.
Thank you, Samson. I think my co-panelists have answered all the questions that has been posed, and I agree with them completely. The only thing I want to add is that the change we all desire starts with us, and we have to reignite civic activism to be able to get it done. Thank you.
Okay, so he took me unawares. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause once again for our panelists. Dr. Ali Dusedu of the Political Science Department, University of Ghana, Clara Berry Kaseti of the University of Ghana Law School, and Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh of the CDD. Thank you all so very much. I'm Samson Ladi Anyenini. I have been your moderator. I will now hand over the microphone to the Deputy Chairman, Operations, NCCE, Mr. Samuel Asari Ekwamwa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samson. Let me stand on the protocols earlier established to give these remarks. I believe we have had a very good discussion, and the objective for coming here, I'm sure, has been on course. Our meeting here is to set the agenda for revisiting the reform agenda for our Constitution. And I can see that we have really deepened the current public discourse on taking a look again at our Constitution and some reforms. I do not intend to repeat or to summarize whatever has gone on here, but I just want to touch briefly on especially what the first Deputy Speaker said, that we should go back, that the NCCE should go back to charge our officers on the ground to go to the marketplaces to talk to people down there about the issues that we are discussing here and issues pertaining to our Constitution. I believe members of staff here are already aware that this is ongoing, and like our acting chairperson said, this is just the beginning of the program, and we charge our officers across the country to take the conversation down to the people, down there. I believe, unfortunately he has left, but our officers on the ground are very familiar with him, and he is familiar with them, and the way they go chasing him to sit in our programs. So I believe in that spirit, he made that observation, because he knows that the commission really has that capacity. There has been some questions in the past about even the relevance of the commission, our role as a public education commission, which has funding from the state, whether it was relevant. And today's discussions that have gone on, the most important aspect to me are the issue about participation, holding our leaders accountable. We are really working with organizations on the ground, civil society, driving that process of holding leaders accountable. And one of our flagship programs, which is social auditing program, is really producing results. And maybe this forum is not the appropriate one to celebrate that. But I would like to assure all of us here that we are not going to put to waste the little resource that government invests in us. We are going to take this program down to all the people down there, and we call on everybody and institution that has a role to play in making these calls work, to get up and work. We should walk the talk. We should walk the talk. We will play our role by raising awareness of the public. Once again, let me thank all our key speakers and discussants and our able moderator, Samson Ayenini, who has been with us always, and the media. We thank you very much. Unfortunately, our key speaker, Justice Puaman, has left, but we will not keep our appreciation to our chest. We want to thank him very, very well. We thank everybody here, and NCCE staff. You are walking the talk. You hit the ground running, and like Oliver Twist, the little that we had from government and from our donors, we need more, so we can do more. So our constitution will really, really be a living document. Even though it doesn't have legs, like Clara said, we hope to see it one day start working. Thank you, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairman, Operations, Mr. Samuel Asari Kwamwa. Let's give it up for him again. Yeah, we were also joined by Dr. Elizabeth Gomani Chidinu, that's the Principal Secretary, Ministry of National Unity, Malawi. She missed her flight yesterday, so she joined us in course of the discussion. Dr. Elizabeth, give us a wave. They are visiting the NCCE to understudy the work of civic education in Ghana. This has been the 2022 Annual Constitution Week of the National Commission for Civic Education. And this year we have been benevolent enough. We have given you copies of the Constitution. Please study it and make contribution to the discourse so that we'll move our nation forward. This is a national level activity. We'll have the regional level and the district level, and we are urging all of you to participate because citizens' participation is key to every thriving democracy.